Centralia still burns, where the earth breathes smoke and the dead do not rest. Chapter 1. The Road to Centralia. It was Maya's idea. That much would be agreed upon later, meaning the frantic, white-knuckled hours that none of them could have predicted when they loaded up Jordan's battered 2009 Honda Accord on that bright Friday morning in Lancaster. Maya Chen had been nursing the idea for 3 semesters, ever since a documentary on her laptop had filled her dorm room with grainy footage of smoke curling silently from cracks in an empty Pennsylvania road. A coal mine fire that's been burning underground since 1962, she'd told Jordan and Dex with a reverence usually reserved for sacred things. The whole town evacuated. They just left. The streets are still there, the road signs, the curbs, but nobody lives there anymore. It's like a ghost town that's on fire from the inside. Jordan Harris had been easy to convince. He was a geology major with a battered Nikon camera perpetually slung around his neck, and the idea of photographing active steam vents in a condemned borough had him searching for cheap motels within 20 minutes of Maya's pitch. He found a motor lodge in Mount Carmel, 12 miles east of Centralia, far enough from the subsurface fires to ensure the ground wouldn't swallow them in the night, he'd joked. Nobody had laughed quite as easily as he'd hoped. Dexter Williams Dex to everyone who knew him, which was everyone had needed slightly more persuading. He was pre-law, practical, the kind of person who checked weather forecasts before leaving the house and kept a first aid kit in his backpack. It's a condemned area, he'd pointed out. The government literally paid people to leave. But Maya had shown him photos on her phone. The cracked asphalt of Route 61, split open like the spine of an old book. The faded graffiti on the remaining highway overpasses. The headstones and the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Cemetery standing above the thin white plumes of escaping gas. Think of the stories, she'd said. And Dex, who had an undeniable weakness for a good story, had sighed and said fine. They left Lancaster at 8 in the morning, Maya in the passenger seat with her notebook already open, Dex stretched across the back with a podcast playing through one earbud. The October sky over Route 322 was a deep and cloudless blue. The kind of sky that Pennsylvania saves for the weeks before winter arrives and forecloses on everything. The trees along the highway had gone copper and rust and flame yellow, and Jordan kept pointing out the window at ridgelines and saying things like, "Look at that light," in a reverent photographer's murmur. Maya wrote things in her notebook. Dex dozed. Estimated drive time from Lancaster to Centralia, 1 hour and 45 minutes. They took 2 hours and 20 minutes, Jordan stopped once to photograph a rusted grain silo, and they pulled off once more for gas and terrible coffee outside of Lebanon. The landscape shifted as they moved north and west, the clean suburban geometry of Lancaster County giving way to something older and rougher. The hills grew steeper, the towns grew smaller, their main streets a little more shuttered, their churches a little more prominent. They passed through Shamokin, and the roads narrowed, and the mountains pressed in on either side with a weight that felt less scenic and more deliberate, as if the land itself was funneling them toward something. Population, 0, Maya read aloud from her phone as they crossed into Columbia County. Centralia, Pennsylvania, incorporated 1,866. Current population, 5, officially. She paused. Some sources say 8. Nobody agrees. The ones still there, they refused to leave. The government took their neighbors' houses by eminent domain and demolished them, but a few families held out. They're still there. Old. Old people who won't leave a town where the ground is literally on fire, Dex said from the back. Reassuring. It's their home, Maya said, with a firmness that closed the subject. They found the motel in Mount Carmel without incident, a low, slightly damp building called the Anthracite Arms that had clearly been named in more optimistic days when coal was still king in this part of Pennsylvania. The woman at the desk handed them 2 room keys on heavy plastic keychains and told them the ice machine was broken and that checkout was 10 o'clock sharp. She looked at them the way people in small towns sometimes look at outsiders, not unfriendly exactly, but watchful, measuring something. "You kids going to Centralia?" she asked, as Jordan picked up the keys. "Day trip tomorrow," he said, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been there. "Just to see the vents? Take some photos." The woman nodded slowly, her expression rearranging itself into something harder to read. "Don't stay after dark," she said. She said it the way people say things they've said before, not dramatically, not as a warning designed to frighten, but flatly, the way you'd tell someone not to drink the tap water in a town where the tap water was bad. A simple statement of fact learned through familiarity. Roads get bad, fog off the vents, you can't see a thing. We'll be back well before dark, Maya said pleasantly. The woman gave them a long look that said she had heard that before too. Then she smiled, just barely, and went back to her paperwork. That night they ate at a diner 2 blocks from the motel, where the pierogies were excellent and the cell service was mediocre, and the other patrons paid them no particular attention. They talked about the trip, about their classes, about Jordan's thesis project, about Dex's internship applications. They were loud in the easy, unself-conscious way of people who don't yet know what the next 24 hours will bring. Maya ordered a 3rd cup of coffee and spread her notes across the table. History of the mine fire, geological surveys, first-person accounts she'd collected from forums and local archives. The fire had started, most likely, when the borough burned its landfill in May of 1962. The exposed culm bank had ignited, and the fire had found the coal seam beneath, and then it had traveled slowly, invisibly, inexorably through the underground veins of anthracite that threaded the hills like dark arteries. It'll burn for another 250 years minimum, Maya said, running her finger down a printed page. Maybe longer. The seam is massive. They tried to dig it out, tried to flood it, tried to pump it with fly ash. Nothing worked. The fire just moved around every intervention, kept going. It's patient. She looked up. Doesn't that strike you as almost willful? Like the fire wants to keep burning? Fire wants what fire wants, Jordan said, stealing one of her pierogies. Can't argue with thermodynamics. Dex said nothing. He was looking out the window at the dark main street of Mount Carmel, where a single streetlight illuminated a circle of cracked asphalt and dead leaves tumbling in a wind that had picked up from the north. Something about the place sat uneasily in him. He was a practical person. He didn't believe in omens or atmosphere or the pathetic fallacy. But something about the way the leaves moved in that light, something about the particular quality of the silence outside the diner's bright windows, made the back of his neck prickle in a way he couldn't entirely rationalize away. He said nothing about it. He paid his portion of the check, and they walked back through the cold October night to the Anthracite Arms, and they went to sleep. In the morning, they would drive to Centralia. Chapter 2. The Town That Smolders. Centralia on a Saturday morning in October was exactly as strange and exactly as beautiful as Maya's research had promised. They arrived just after 9, parking Jordan's Accord on a stretch of Locust Avenue where the asphalt had been cracked and humped into strange shapes by decades of subsurface heat and shifting ground. And for a moment, all 3 of them simply stood beside the car and looked. It was not the ruin they had half imagined, at least not entirely. The streets were intact, the curbs still present, the old grid of the town still legible in the land. But where the houses had stood, there were only flat, empty lots, some covered in pale grass, some marked by the ghost shapes of foundations. The trees that remained were thin and sickly, their bark oddly pale, their roots finding no purchase in ground that shifted and breathed below them. And everywhere, in the low places along the road margins and in the cracks of the curbs, thin wisps of smoke rose in the still morning air. Sulfur dioxide, Jordan said, clicking off a shot with his Nikon. Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, the whole underground combustion suite. He moved closer to a crack in the road and crouched, holding his hand over it. Warm, he said, almost to himself. The ground is warm. Maya was already walking, notebook out, recording. She had the quality of a person who was exactly where she'd always meant to be, a kind of focused, private satisfaction in her movements. She photographed with her phone, sketched quick maps of the lot layouts, read aloud the few remaining street signs. Wood Street, Locust Avenue, East Park Street. She turned a slow circle. The church is still standing. St. Ignatius, over there. They walked to the church, a modest stone structure that had somehow survived both the evacuation and the decades of subsurface shifting. Its windows were dark and sealed with plywood. Its door was locked. But the building stood solid on a ridge above the worst of the fissuring, and from the low hill of its lot they could see the whole empty geometry of the former town stretching below them in the cool morning light. Dex had brought a carbon monoxide detector, of course he had, and he carried it out in front of him as they walked, watching the readout with the alertness of someone who had read the NIOSH guidelines before leaving Lancaster. The readings were low near the road, higher near the active vents, and once, near a collapsed section of the old Route 61, the device beeped urgently enough that they all took 3 large steps back from the crack and waited for the reading to drop before continuing. "That's why they left," Dex said quietly, watching the numbers fall. "You can't live on ground that'll try to gas you." "You can't live on ground that'll try to swallow you either," Jordan added, photographing the crack with a kind of cheerful scientific interest. "Some of these subsidence sinkholes open up overnight. No warning. The whole road surface just drops." The famous collapse. In February 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking in his grandmother's backyard when the ground opened beneath him. He fell into a sinkhole 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep, warm and full of carbon monoxide gas. His cousin pulled him out by his wrists just before he lost consciousness. It was this event, more than any other, that convinced the state and federal government to accelerate the evacuation of Centralia. They spent the morning working their way through the grid. They found the old cemetery on the hill, the headstones thick and weathered, dating back to the mid-1800s, some tilted at strange angles where the ground below had shifted. Steam rose between the rows in the cold air, and Maya stood among the stones and said nothing for a long time. Jordan photographed the view from the hill, the valley, the abandoned road, the thin white plumes rising from a dozen places in the earth below. Dex sat on a low stone wall and ate a granola bar and watched a hawk describe slow circles overhead. "This is incredible," Maya said. "This is genuinely one of the strangest places I've ever been." "I keep feeling like the ground is warm," Jordan said, pressing the sole of his shoe against the grass. "Is the ground warm, or am I imagining that?" "Both," Dex said. They had lunch in the car. Sandwiches from a shop in Mount Carmel they'd had the foresight to stock up at before driving out. The afternoon passed in a haze of exploration. More photographs, more notes, a long walk up the old graffiti highway overgrown section where visiting artists had covered the concrete barriers in murals of extraordinary color and variety. Faces, creatures, abstractions, dates, declarations of love and messages to the dead. The murals had been painted and repainted for decades. New layers of color over old ones, the oldest ones cracking and peeling and showing through like strata in a cliff face. "I could stay here all week," Maya said at one point, and she meant it. But the afternoon was shortening. The October sun moved with its autumn efficiency, dropping toward the western ridge earlier than any of them quite wanted. By 4 o'clock, the light had gone golden and long, and the shadows of the few remaining trees stretched far across the empty lots, and the smoke from the vents was catching the late light in ways that Jordan photographed obsessively until the light was almost gone. "We should head back," Dex said at 4:30. It was not a question. "1 more hour," Maya said. "Maya, 1 hour. I want to see what it looks like at dusk, the way the smoke looks in the last light." "We're 12 miles from the motel," Dex said. "We have dinner reservations." "We have a vague intention to eat somewhere," Maya corrected. "That's different from reservations." She was already walking toward the cemetery hill, where the view was best. 30 minutes, I promise." Jordan looked at Dex. Dex looked at Jordan. They followed Maya up the hill, because they always did, and because the view really was extraordinary, and because 30 minutes didn't seem like very long at all. It never does. Chapter 3. Saturday night, the sky turns green. It was well past 6 when they finally walked back to the car, their breath misting in the cold, dark air, the lights of the occasional distant farmhouse pricking the blackness of the hills around them. The temperature had dropped sharply with the sun, the kind of October cold that arrives quickly and completely, the kind that makes the air feel thin and final. Centralia at night was something different than Centralia in daylight. The smoke from the ground vents was invisible now against the dark sky, detectable only by the slight sulfurous edge in the air and by the faint warmth that still radiated from certain sections of the cracked road. Ghostly and inexplicable, heat from a fire that had been burning underground for longer than any of them had been alive. Jordan turned the key in the ignition. The Accord sputtered. He turned it again. A sound like a cough, like something catching and then losing its grip, and then silence. "Jordan," Dex said. "I know." "Jordan." "I said I know." He tried again. The engine turned over sluggishly, moaned in a way that communicated unambiguous mechanical distress, and then stopped. Jordan turned on the interior light and looked at the dashboard. The gas gauge read a third of a tank. The temperature gauge had been normal all day. Nothing in the cluster of warning lights had illuminated. And yet the car sat as inert as a stone on the cracked asphalt of Locust Avenue, in the dark, in Centralia. "Is it the battery?" Maya asked from the passenger seat, though she knew approximately nothing about cars, and the question was more wishful than diagnostic. "Battery would be a clicking sound," Jordan said. "This is something in the engine. Might be the alternator." "Might be." He stopped and looked at the hood with the expression of someone who knows just enough about a subject to know when they're in over their head. "I'm not sure." Dex had his phone out. "I'll call AAA." A pause. He looked at the screen, held it higher, moved it toward the windshield. "I have no signal." He got out of the car and stood in the road, holding his phone above his head, turning in a slow circle. Nothing. 0 bars. The others checked their phones. Same result. The mountains in this part of Pennsylvania had always been rough on cell service, and Centralia itself sat in a valley cupped by ridges that further degraded any signal. They'd had intermittent service all day, but now there was nothing at all, not even a ghost of a bar. "We can walk," Maya said. "Mount Carmel is 12 miles. That's 3.5, 4 hours at a normal pace." "In the dark," Dex said. "On unfamiliar roads, in an area with active ground subsidence. Or we wait in the car until morning and walk in the light," he continued. "It's cold, but not dangerous cold. We have food left over from lunch. In the morning, we can walk to the highway and flag someone down." "I might be able to fix it," Jordan said. "Give me 10 minutes with the hood up." He spent 20 minutes under the hood with a flashlight from Maya's keychain, which was not a large flashlight, while Dex and Maya sat in the car with their coats pulled tight. Jordan found nothing obviously wrong and closed the hood and got back in the car with the helpless, frustrated expression of a man defeated by his own technical limitations. "It's something internal," he said. "I'd need a mechanic and daylight." And then Maya said, "Look at the sky." They looked. The sky above the ridgeline to the north had taken on a quality that was neither aurora borealis nor anything they had a ready word for. A suffusion of green-white light, low and diffuse, not quite a glow and not quite a shimmer, playing along the horizon as if the ridge itself were faintly luminous. It pulsed in slow, irregular intervals. It was beautiful and deeply strange and wrong in a way that was difficult to articulate but immediate in its impact. "Solar storm," Jordan said quietly. "A geomagnetic storm. That's what it is. I read about a KP9 event forecast for this weekend. I thought it might be visible this far south, but I didn't think—" He reached for his phone reflexively before remembering it was useless. "That's why we have no signal. The storm is disrupting radio frequencies. Everything's knocked out." "Everything," Dex repeated, meaning there's no way to call for help. They sat for a moment in the car, watching the green light pulse along the ridgeline, beautiful and indifferent. The road was empty in both directions as far as the headlights reached, which, they now realized, was not far at all, because Jordan had turned the car's headlights off to conserve whatever battery power remained. The dark around them was total and rural and very, very quiet. And then, from somewhere in that dark, from the direction of the empty lots to the east, from the places where houses had once stood, came a sound. It was not the sound of an animal. It was not the sound of wind through dead grass, or steam pressure in a ground vent, or the settling of a foundation. It was a sound that the human auditory system is evolutionarily calibrated to recognize and respond to with a very specific cascade of hormones, a very specific escalation of heart rate, a very specific and ancient sense of threat. It was the sound of footsteps, more than one set, moving through the dark, over the cracked and empty ground where Centralia's houses used to be, coming slowly, without hurry, but coming nonetheless toward the car. "What is that?" Maya whispered. Nobody answered her. Nobody had an answer that made sense. Chapter 4. What Crawls from the Cracks? Jordan turned on the headlights. The beam cut into the dark and illuminated the road ahead, the cracked asphalt, the empty lots on either side, the thin dead grass, and for a moment there was nothing to see. And Maya exhaled, and Dex's hand relaxed on the door handle, and then one of them stepped into the light. The first impression was human. The shape of it was human bipedal, upright, the approximate proportions of a person, but the way it moved was not right in a way that was immediately and viscerally apparent. It was moving toward the car with the strange, lurching fluidity of something that was operating a human body without complete familiarity with the controls. The gait was wrong. The arms were held at an angle that was subtly but deeply incorrect, and the head was angled in a way that suggested the neck was not performing its structural function with full competence. Its skin, in the headlight beam, was gray-white. Not the gray-white of illness or cold, but the deeper, more definitive gray of something that had been underground in the heat and the dark for a very long time. Its eyes, when the light caught them directly, reflected with a flat, animal shine. It was wearing clothes, or had been, once. What remained clung in dark, ragged strips. More of them moved into the light's periphery. 2 more, then 3. Then more, coming from the empty lots on either side of the road, emerging from the dark margins of the beam, as if the darkness itself were generating them. "Drive," Dex said. "The car doesn't." "Jordan, drive." Jordan turned the key. The engine made its terrible sound and did not catch. He tried again. Again. In the headlights, the first figure had reached the front of the car and was placing both hands on the hood with a flat, purposeless pressure. "Lock the doors," Maya said, very quietly, and they locked the doors. There were perhaps a dozen of them in the headlight beam now, and more sounds from the dark behind the car. They did not rush. They did not make sounds that could be called vocalization. Exactly, there was something, a low exhalation, a resonance that seemed almost geological in its patience and regularity, like the breathing of the ground itself. They converged on the car with the unhurried certainty of something that had no reason to hurry. "What are they?" Jordan said. It was not quite a question. "They're the ones who didn't leave," Maya said. Her voice was completely level. She was staring through the windshield with the same focused intensity she'd brought to her research. "The ones who died here, in the fire, in the gases. Over 60 years of people dying in this ground." She turned to look at the others, and her expression was strange. "The ground is warm. It's been warm for 60 years. The gas, the heat, the mineral composition. Something in the conditions here, something in what the fire and the gases and the subsidence has done to the ground it kept them." "Maya," Dex said. "It kept them," she said again, and then something hit the passenger window with a flat, open-palmed sound, and she finally flinched. The figure at the window was pressing its face against the glass. In the dim interior light of the car, the face was visible, the skin pulled tight over the underlying architecture of the skull, the eyes open and flat, and utterly without the quality that human eyes always carry. The mouth was working in a small, slow rhythm, as if the mechanism of chewing or speaking had been retained in the absence of whatever had originally animated it. "We need to get out," Dex said. "Not through the doors they're surrounded. But if we can get out the driver's side and run north along the road, away from the main cluster—" "Tools!" Jordan said suddenly. "I have tools in the trunk. Jack handle, tire iron. I always keep—" He was already climbing between the front seats, and Dex was moving with him, and Maya was a half-second behind, and Jordan was reaching through into the cold dark of the trunk space, his hand finding the tire iron by feel, and he pulled it out and handed it to Dex, and found the telescoping jack handle and kept it for himself. Maya had a camping multi-tool on her keychain, a gift from her father, who worried about her. She unfolded the largest blade. They sat in the car, armed with inadequate implements, surrounded by things that had been human once and were not anymore, and they looked at each other in the thin interior light. "North along the road," Dex said again. "Driver's side has fewer of them. We go together, we stay together, we don't stop for anything." He looked at each of them. "Together." "Together," Jordan said. "Together," Maya said. Jordan pulled the driver's door handle. The door swung open into the cold night, and the 3 of them ran. What followed was chaos distilled into a few minutes of pure kinetic terror. The cracked road hard under their feet, their breath coming in ragged clouds in the cold air. The headlights of the Accord falling away behind them as they ran. The figures on the road parting before them with a terrible lack of urgency, no flinching, no dodging, simply turning to track the motion of the running figures with those flat, reflective eyes. Dex swung the tire iron once at something that came too close on the right, and the impact was terrible and final sounding, and the figure went down. Jordan pushed another one aside with a force born of pure adrenaline. Maya ran. She was fast, the fastest of the three, her legs pumping, her footsteps finding the best line through the cracked asphalt with an instinct that was new and immediate and entirely focused on survival. They made it perhaps 150 yards north along Locust Avenue before Dex said, "Here cut left the old park, open ground, fewer of them." And they cut left, vaulting a low curb, into the open dark of one of Centralia's empty lots. And for a moment the figures on the road behind them were falling back, and it seemed like it might be all right, and then the ground changed under their feet. The lot was warmer than the road. The grass was dead and pale and sparse, and beneath it the earth had the slightly yielding quality of ground that has been compromised by the heat and movement below. In the dark they couldn't see the cracks, the hairline subsidences, the places where the ground had fractured and settled into new geometries, and they ran over this ground, trusting in its surface, without knowledge of what lay beneath. They had almost reached the far side of the lot when the ground opened under Jordan. Chapter 5. The Fisher and the Horde. There was a sound, a crack, sharp and geological, the sound of the earth making a structural decision, and then Jordan was gone. Not fallen, not tripped, gone. The ground accepted him with a completeness that made Maya, who was 3 steps behind him, scream with a volume and a rawness that she had never produced before in her life. She threw herself down at the edge of the fissure, which was perhaps 2 feet wide and opened into dark that the keychain flashlight barely touched, and she screamed his name into it. "Jordan!" Her voice came back to her, slightly changed by the acoustics of the void below, warmer, muffled by the heat that rose in a visible shimmer from the opening. "Jordan!" Dex was beside her, on his knees at the edge, shining his phone screen down into the gap. It was perhaps 12 feet deep at this section, wider lower down, a bell-shaped opening into a subsidence cavity where the mine workings had finally completed their slow collapse. Jordan was at the bottom. He had landed on his back. In the phone screen light they could see him, and they could see the angle of his left leg, which was wrong in a way that required no medical training to interpret, and they could see the steam rising around him from cracks in the cavity floor. And they could see his chest moving. He was alive, he was breathing, and they could see his eyes, which were open and looking up at them with an expression that contained everything: pain, recognition, calculation, and something else, something that was also a kind of farewell. "Jordan." Dex's voice was steady only by great effort. "Jordan, listen to me. Can you move?" A pause. Jordan tried. The expression on his face answered the question before he spoke. "My leg," he said, his voice coming up through 12 feet of superheated air with a surreal clarity. "And my back I can't feel." He stopped. "I can't feel my legs, Dex." "The CO level's down there," Jordan said. His voice was different now, slower, the words more deliberate. The carbon monoxide from the vents below was accumulating in the cavity, and they all knew what that meant. "The gas. I can already feel it. I can feel it." A pause. "Maya." His voice changed on her name. "Maya, my camera's in the car, on the back seat. Take it with you." "Jordan." "I need you to take my camera." His voice was slower now, and higher, with the strange calm of hypoxia beginning its work. "Please, I need that to mean something. Please." Maya was crying. She pressed both hands to the edge of the fissure and looked down at him, at his face in the phone screen light, and she said, "I will." And she said, "I love you." And she said his name again, once more. And then Dex's hand was on her arm, not pulling, just there, just present. And she heard the footsteps on the cracked ground behind them, the slow and patient shuffle of approach, and she understood that the choice had been made for them by the same terrible geometry that had made all the choices tonight. She stood. She did not look back at the fissure. She could not. "East," Dex said. "Back toward Locust. The car. We have to try the car again." They ran. The figures were thicker now in this part of the lot. Dex moved with the tire iron and the focused, economic violence of someone who has accepted that this is what survival requires. Maya moved with the multi-tool and with a grief that had bypassed shock and arrived directly at something raw and functional. They fought their way back across the lot and over the curb and onto Locust Avenue, and the Accord was there, headlights still burning, figures moving around it in slow orbits. 20 feet from the car, something caught Dex's coat. He pulled free, the fabric tore, and turned to push the figure away, and another one was behind it, and for a moment, he was between two of them. And Maya was 3 steps ahead, and he called out to her, and she turned and came back, and then there were 3, and then 4, converging from the empty lots on both sides of the road. Dex. Maya's voice, sharp and specific. Dex. The car. Go. He turned and ran for the car, and something took hold of his ankle. Not a grab exactly, more of an entanglement, and he went down hard on the asphalt, the tire iron skittering away, and he tried to rise. And the weight was on him, and Maya was screaming his name. And then a hand, cold, slow, possessed of a terrible constancy, found his shoulder, and another found his collar, and Dex Williams, pre-law, practical, the person who always kept a first aid kit in his backpack, said one word. He said go. He said it clearly and completely, and with the full weight of everything it meant. The recognition that the math was terminal, the instruction to the one person left who could act on it. The final gift of someone who has understood that the only choice remaining is the quality of the ending. Go, Maya. Go. She went. She did not look back. She would spend years understanding why that was the right thing, and why it felt every single morning when she woke up like the worst thing she had ever done. Chapter 6. One engine left to start. Maya Chen reached the Accord alone. She threw herself into the driver's seat and pulled the door closed and locked it in a single convulsive motion, and then she sat in the driver's seat of a car that did not run in Centralia, Pennsylvania, at 11:17 in the evening, with the headlights burning and figures moving in the beams, and the green light of the solar storm pulsing on the ridge, and the ground warm beneath the tires, and 2 people who had been her best friends dead in the dark outside. She allowed herself 8 seconds. She counted them. She would not be able to explain why 8 later, except that it felt like the correct quantity enough to absorb the full weight of what had happened, not enough to let it immobilize her. In those 8 seconds, she felt everything. The grief, the terror, the guilt, the vertigo of a world that had revealed itself to operate by different rules than the ones she had been raised to trust. She felt Jordan going into the ground and Dex going down on the asphalt, and the absolute certainty that she was alone, and that alone was the condition she would have to work with. Then she reached for the steering column, and she began to think. The car had not started because of something in the engine. Jordan had said that. Something internal. Not the battery, the headlights still burned, which meant the battery had charge. Not the gas. Not the temperature. Something had failed in the starting sequence, some component between the battery and the combustion, and Jordan hadn't been able to identify it in the dark with a keychain flashlight. And Jordan was a geology major who'd taken one automotive maintenance class as a freshman elective and then never thought about it again. Maya was not a geology major. Maya was an anthropology major with a double minor in journalism and environmental studies, and she had grown up in a house in Lancaster where her father, who worried about her, had insisted that she learn how to change her own oil and jumpstart her own car and perform at least a basic diagnosis when something went wrong. She had rolled her eyes at the time. She was not rolling her eyes now. She turned on the interior light. Something hit the driver's window, and she did not look at it. Something else hit the passenger window, and she did not look at that either. She found the hood release under the steering column and pulled it, and then she opened the door quickly, making the small sound in her throat that she'd been suppressing, and the figure nearest the driver's side turned toward her, and she jabbed it hard in the face with the multi-tool, and it staggered back, and she was out of the car and around to the front, and had the hood up in the time it took 3 more figures to orient toward her. The headlights illuminated the engine bay from below. She had 2 minutes, maybe less, before they reached her. She looked at the engine with the focused intensity she'd been applying to Centralia all day, the same quality of attention she'd brought to the headstones and the fissures and the graffiti murals, and she looked for what was wrong. The spark plug wires. One of them had vibrated loose over 60,000 miles of Pennsylvania road. She could see it immediately in the headlight wash, the wire sitting slightly off its terminal, the connection incomplete. How Jordan had missed it in the dark with his tiny flashlight, she would never know, except that you don't see what you're not looking for, and Jordan had been looking for something worse. This was not worse. This was fixable. She pressed the wire back onto the terminal with both thumbs. She pressed hard. She felt it seat with a small mechanical click that was, in that moment, the best sound she had ever heard in her life. Something grabbed her shoulder. She spun and drove her elbow back with every pound of leverage she had, and felt the impact, and did not look at what fell, and slammed the hood down, and was back in the driver's seat with the door locked in a time she could not have. Measured with a stopwatch, because time had done the thing it does in extremity, had become something else, had become pure sensation and action without interval. She turned the key. The engine caught. It caught like a living thing remembering itself, a cough, a hesitation, and then the full-throated, deeply ordinary sound of a four-cylinder combustion engine warming to its purpose. And Maya sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the wheel and the engine running and the gear shift in her hand, and she was shaking so hard that the wheel trembled, and her face was wet, and she put the car in drive. The figures in the headlight beam did not move aside. She pressed the gas anyway. She pressed it harder than she meant to, and the Accord lurched forward with a jolt that threw her against the seatbelt, and the figures that were in the road went down or went sideways, and she did not stop, and she did not slow down, and she did not look in the rearview mirror, not yet, not for a long time. She drove north through the empty streets of Centralia, past the cemetery on the hill, past the church of St. Ignatius, past the vacant lots and the cracked curbs and the thin white plumes of steam rising from the warm ground, and then she was on Route 61, the old highway, the condemned section, its surface cracked and tilted and wholly beautiful in the headlights. And then she was past that and on a real road, a maintained road, a road that went somewhere. And the green light of the solar storm pulsed overhead and faded as the ridge fell behind her, and the speedometer climbed to 50, to 60, to 65. And the lights of Mount Carmel appeared on the horizon ahead like something promised. She drove. She drove, and she didn't stop driving until the anthracite arms appeared on the right, and she pulled into the parking lot and put the car in park and sat there with the engine running, her hands still on the wheel, the headlights pointing at a concrete block wall. The woman from the front desk was standing in the parking lot. She was wearing a coat over her nightgown, and she was watching the car with the expression of someone who had been awakened by a sound and had come out to find its source, but also with something else in her expression, something that was not quite surprise. She looked at the car for a moment. She looked at the lone figure in the driver's seat. She did not ask where the others were. She simply said, "Come inside, I'll make coffee." Maya turned off the engine. She sat for one more moment in the silence of the car, in the smell of Jordan's cologne on the headrest and Dex's granola bar wrapper in the cup holder, and the particular quality of air that accumulates in a car occupied by three people who were friends and laughed a lot and didn't know what was coming. Then she got out of the car. She reached into the back seat and she took Jordan's Nikon camera carefully by the strap and she hung it around her neck. She walked toward the light of the open motel door. Behind her, 12 miles to the west, Centralia kept burning, as it had burned for 60 years, as it would burn for 200 more. Patient and warm and permanent in the dark hills of Pennsylvania, where the coal seams run deep and the fire has never needed anything from the people on the surface to keep going, has never needed them at all. It just keeps burning. It always has. The end.